direction, make no mistake about it, the direction of the home, it flows through the men. And that's not just for us to be chauvinistic about. It is a responsibility and a mandate that, quite frankly, we see that ball's been dropped, and society as a whole is reflective of that.
And when I think of toxic masculinity, I don't think of the strong man. I think of the man with no chest. I think C.S. Lewis talked about that, the chest, quite a bit. I think about the weak man, because weak men have the ability to do more damage in society than the strong man. They're more of a threat because there's no identity, there's no confidence, there's no meekness, which is that controlled strength. And it's often the weak men, the one who don't feel heard, who don't feel understand, that end up going out and carrying out some of these crazy acts of violence that we've seen in our culture over the years. It's typically the loner, the isolated guy, has no friends, has no family, and then one day he just snaps and goes out and goes crazy. And masculinity, true masculinity, is the antidote for that. Godly masculinity, it is the antidote for that type of stuff that we're seeing in our culture. I saw Patrick Bet-David. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's got a huge podcast. He started out with leadership and entrepreneurship, and now he does a lot more stuff like cultural events and current events. And he put a video up just a couple of days ago talking about the father issue in America and the fatherhood crisis, really, and how the father absence in our country is some of the statistics, and I can't recall them off the top right now, but they're at an all-time high of children that are being raised in the home without dads. And then you start to look at guys in culture kind of coming to the surface, and Andrew Tate is a name that's on everybody's lips right now. If you're not familiar with Andrew, either you've been living under a rock, because I'm certainly probably seeing someone. I mean, people, not you. We talked about Andrew before the show, but in general, he was one of the most Google searched men on the planet. And you see a guy like this kind of come to prominence and create so much popularity in such a short period of time. And, very type A, macho, masculine, I got all the cars, I got all the girls, I'm making all the money type guy. And how much a guy like that resonates with the young men in our culture. And I was just, interested to try to connect the two, right? Is one a symptom of the other? And maybe just we'll just start there and hear some of your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. We definitely have a void, definitely in my ethnic background, definitely in my ethnic family, as far as Black Americans. With the advent of the Great Society, we went from 77% of two-parent home to now probably in the low 20s. And how that's affected children, and how it's just totally shifted the culture as far as Black culture. So, I mean, and obviously the other ethnicities have caught up as far as that dysfunction goes, of not being committed to our families, not being committed to the vows that we take when we get married. So, a strong, because of that void, there are guys that can come in like an Andrew Tate that, and also, I mean, as another issue, we're in an increasingly effeminate society where feminism is being promoted. We have a term called toxic masculinity now, as we're trying to persuade people away from authentic manhood. The rugged John Wayne figures of our movies from the 70s, the Clint Eastwoods, all those things, we've moved away from those things. We're seeing more and more, if you will, beta type males in society now, rather than the alpha males like an Andrew Tate. I'm sure you've probably even heard of Kevin Samuels, who passed away recently, and some of the straight shooting things that he said to women that call in and question him.
Yeah.
And so I mean, those type of straight shooters are people don't really know how to receive them, but there is an attraction that draws people to that. Um, I think a lot of men probably look at an Andrew Tate or a Kevin Samuels, wishing that they could be that way privately, even if they don't really want to admit that,
Mm.
because that is, again, that's what we came from. We came from strong male types. I mean, there's a reason we love football. We love the contact, we love the competition. I mean, that's just innate in our makeup as men. And so we've seen a gradual softening of society to where, again, men are being pushed away from the table as we see more and more females uh, take leadership roles, be more vocal. I still, I admit, I have trouble sometimes when I watch a sports show maybe on TV, and I see a whole panel of women debating football, and I'm like, wait a minute, where's the guys at? I mean,
Right.
not a chauvinist at all, but I mean, I'm from way back when we had maybe one woman back in the early days of CBS, Phyllis George, uh, be uh, be on there with Brent Musburger and some of these other guys, and now we see so many women, and again, I don't have a problem with seeing women rise to the forefront and do some things like that, but I think there's an underlying push away from authentic manhood.
Mm.
Um, I was just thinking about it this morning. We've had a void, really. We used to have Promise Keepers movement back in the '90s, where men got together and went to stadiums and worshiped together, ate together, and talked about male things. Fathers would take their sons, and we have a void there because of, again, there's an outright war that can't be argued against manhood, against masculinity.
Yeah.
And we're seeing it with the rise of the transgender thing, the rise of gender dysphoria, and all these different things that are coming from the fact that we're now preaching non-binary. We're preaching, subjective decisions based on what you think you are.
You feel in the moment. Yeah.
And
We did a series on that at my church back in on the fall. There's a book by a guy by the name of Chase Repleog. It's called The Five Masculine Instincts, and really talks about the crisis that men are going through in general, because all masculinity has been labeled as toxic, and gender is so fluid now. It's against the cultural current to celebrate the differences and the distinct differences of men and women. And if we celebrate even traditional gender roles, like in my home, I work and my wife is home with the children, and that's not to say she couldn't go out and get a job if she wanted to, but we both find deep value in doing what we feel like God has designed us to do, and she can do things that I can't do. I do things that she can't do. And, I think there's some of this mindset, whereas if you embrace any type of masculinity in today's culture, it's really pushed back one. And Andrew Tate is the extreme. And I think a lot of people do on, he gets the attention because I think he just says what's on his mind, and he's very clear, he's very
Mhm.
direct. And I've almost wondered if some of it isn't for the clicks, right? And some of it isn't a show, as extreme as he goes
Mhm.
sometimes. But even saying things like he said in the past, where it's my duty to protect my wife. Well, that's chauvinistic. Well, no, it isn't. Like, it's my duty. Now there's a lot of controversy around him now. Apparently he's been hemmed up on some charges, and I don't want to say that I'm a fan of any of that. A dude has been convicted of human trafficking or he's guilty of it, then he needs to be put in jail, and so there's no question there. I don't
Yeah.
want anybody listening to get the wrong idea that my conversation about him is an endorsement of that type of behavior. But even guys like Jordan
Yeah.
Peterson, when he came on the scene, I mean, he was initially, like, just speaking out about, masculine issues and encouraging men to make their beds and stand up with their shoulders back, he was dragged through the mud by the
Mhm.
left leaning media, like, as toxic masculinity and why are you so angry? And, conversely, when you get into some of the comment feeds on his videos, you're hearing young men, you know, thank you, Jordan. You saved my life, and in some of his books. And so it's just, you're right. There is this huge push in culture just to you really just discount, masculinity. And it's not, it is difficult, I think, in today's culture to try to, find our place as men, when everything's been so blurred.
It's I'm raising three young men now. Three boys. My wife, like your wife, when we were raising young kids, she didn't work. She eventually took some work as the kids got a little older, and gave her a little more freedom from mothering. But that's uh, that's a role that nowadays, whether opening a door for a woman, do women even want that anymore?
Right. What do I do?
Paying for dinner, paying for dinner, they're like, well, I could pay for my own dinner. I mean,
Yeah, well,
that
you can
sort of
pay for mine
thing
too.
that used to be
Just kidding.
right. That sort of thing used to be how it was ingrained in us that the man is supposed to take care of things. And trust me, I believe there comes a point in relationships, whether it's marriage or not, where women want that, whether they can really articulate it or not, whether they really think through with it. I think they want it deep down. I think they would appreciate it over time, versus a husband that, well, he's playing PlayStation all night long and sleeping all day, and I'm working. After a
Yeah.
while, that relationship's not going to work. So again, they're going to step back into a biblical worldview at some point because that's the way God designed it.
Yeah.
And that's God designed human relationship. God built us that way, for a reason. And no matter what's going on in the culture, uh, it comes back to what the way God does things is what works.
Yeah.
It's proven, it's time tested, and we're going to see challenges more and more as we continue to venture away from what His original design was for us.
So, do you think that some of this battle on masculinity in the culture has led to some of the fatherlessness in homes? I mean, is there a tie in there? What do you think has contributed to, if you had to put your thumb on it and solve this problem in just a moment on a conversation, if what do you think causes that?
Well, I think probably the boomer generation that ended around the '60s. They were committed to marriage. They were committed to the original. Whether their marriages were great or not, they did not divorce, and they raised their kids with those values. And so I believe as we started to see more and more breakups, you know, the husband is the cover, the spiritual covering for the wife and the children. And so as you take that covering away, and the woman takes on a role that's not hers, she's not equipped for it spiritually or physically. So you have single moms raising kids. Those kids are without a male. I mean, and we can, I've seen a lot of statistics on the fact where father absence is. Men are more likely to be incarcerated. Women are more like, girls are more likely to have teenage pregnancies and all those different things. And then you have an epidemic where you've got teenage moms, and so that next generation behind them is compromised. And then so down through the years, we've seen to where we are now, where kids are questioning their identities. Well, your identity, where's our identity as Christians come from? It comes from God, our Father.
Right.
So fathers in a home, are very key for sons, very, very key for daughters. Not to offend any of our female listeners, but it really is important, that identity is really passed down, uh, through the Father. We are the seed. We are the carriers of the seed. We're the ones that you know uh, we're the ones that set the tone for our homes. We're the ones that we should be the role model. We should be what our daughters are looking to find when they want to mate. We should be what our sons aspire to be. Again, mom. I'm not taking away the role of moms. Their nurturing role is very, very key. But the direction, make no mistake about it, the direction of the home, it flows through the men, and that's
Yeah.
not just for us to be chauvinistic about. It is a responsibility and a mandate that, quite frankly, we see that ball's been dropped, and society as a whole is reflective of that. I
Yeah.
mean, it really is.
Yeah. And I think that's the challenge of not being able to celebrate, or the loss of celebration around each individual gender, and what God designed each gender to do. And this whole toxic, chauvinistic, mindset, and really just trying to silence that debate. It's like, this isn't about freedom. A woman and a man can choose to do whatever they want. They have the same opportunities, but just because they can doesn't mean there aren't some things that God uniquely gifted each of us to do. And so I think when we take that away from one gender or the other, we're really missing the beauty in what God created us to be, as male and female. And
Yeah.
these some of these situations, I think you've heard stories of people that have come up, in single parent households and have done really well, and it's
Hmm.
certainly able to be done, but just because it can be done in the exception doesn't mean it has to be the rule, right? And that's what we've
Right.
kind of said. It's like, by celebrating, the fact that a two-parent home is going to ultimately be the best scenario for a child, it's like, well, what about the people that only have one parent? Well, I'm not knocking that, and I believe that God can work, and that child can be raised up and be successful in a one-parent home. But just because that's happened by certain circumstances doesn't mean we should want that to happen in every scenario. It's not taking anything away
Yeah.
from those people, and that seems to be like an issue in culture as well today. It's like, I think if I speak out and I say yellow is my favorite color, it's in culture today.
Mm.
It's like, well, what about the other colors? Why do you hate them all? It's like, no, it's just my favorite. It's just my idea of what a good color is. I like yellow,
Right.
and other people don't like it. But it's like, of course, there's the ability for us to move and be successful in the exception. My words are getting all jumbled up. Excuse me. But
Hmm.
but there is a design, and I think we should seek to follow that design that God has laid out.
The original design in the garden wasn't for man to sin, not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Um, so once that sin was unleashed, didn't mean that God had some great examples of grace all throughout the Bible. Where, I mean, we had Noah who walked uprightly. We had Abraham. We had a lot of these guys that did it right within the midst of dysfunction. But
Yeah,
God's original will was not was not for sin to enter into the world. And
yeah,
so, yeah, I mean, I'm the product of a single mom. But I had some solid. My grandmother, my grand, they really poured into me, and so I made the determination. When I met my wife, that we're going to have to start with our kids.
right,
And the tragic part of it is that whatever generation drops the ball really forces the next generation to have to find those values out in society. I found fathers in baseball coaches. I found fathers in teachers. The scary thing, which obviously isn't our topic for today, but where do people go now, because you got teachers that are grooming, you've got all kinds of those situations in the schools that you really can't count on anymore to
mhm,
find solid role models. So I mean, you force your kids into a culture. When you abandon them, you force them to try to find their identity in a place that's incredibly broken. And so we find, things like gender dysphoria, kids struggling with identity, suicide, all those different things. They come because those kids have been uncovered,
Yeah.
and when they're uncovered, the enemy just, he's hated life from the beginning, and so he wants to come obviously at the most vulnerable of society, to taint it before it ever gets started. And so again, part of our mandate as men is we've got to guard and we've got to govern, we've got to shepherd, we've got to protect.
Yeah.
And when there's no shepherd there, when the sheepfold is left unguarded, the wolves come.
Yeah.
I mean,
And to kind of circle back on that identity piece and what we originally started this section of the conversation with, I mean, you look at an audience of a guy like Tate or Peterson, and it's predominantly young men. And it tells me that despite what society is trying to push down our throats and trying to push, that masculinity is not important and everything's just fluid and you do what you want, be what you want, yada, 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 there's a hunger in these young men for somebody to speak identity into them. They wouldn't be watching if there wasn't. They want somebody to tell them, even I go back to Peterson because one of his viral clips in the beginning was him telling, get up out of bed in the morning and make it, and people kind of joke about that, make your bed, but it's a starting point, and simple, practical advice like that. Those are things that we get from our parents, we get from our fathers. They tell us that. And when there's that vacuum, somebody like Peterson comes along and just says the common sense thing that we all know. But for some of these young men, it's life changing because somebody's speaking instruction into them. And so, if as kingdom men, we're not, whether that be in our own homes or going beyond that, and as you were mentioning, you had other men in your life as you were being raised that spoke identity into you. Like, we have to understand that as a kingdom mandate, there is a vacuum in this culture for strong male figures. And if we're not filling that void, then these men will find somebody. And then masculinity in that regard, when it's not filled with godly masculinity, does become toxic, right? It does become toxic masculinity. And when I think of toxic masculinity, I don't think of the strong man. I think of the man with no chest. I think C.S. Lewis talked about that, the chest, quite a bit. I think about the weak man because weak men have the ability to do more damage in society than the strong man. They're more of a threat because there's no identity, there's no confidence, there's no meekness, which is that controlled strength. And it's often the weak men, the one who don't feel heard, who don't feel understand, that end up going out and carrying out some of these crazy acts of violence that we've seen in our culture over the years. It's typically the loner, the isolated guy, has no friends, has no family, and then one day he just snaps and goes out and goes crazy. And masculinity, true masculinity, is the antidote for that. Godly masculinity, Absolutely. It is the antidote for that type of stuff that we're seeing in our culture.
Yeah, I mean, once upon a time, we'd have policemen come to schools for career day, or, they were highly thought of, and that's a symbol of security in our society. That's, someone as a young kid, you run to a police officer when you feel threatened. So, I mean, that's what we came from, to where we are now, where we because of the fatherless absence and the whole thing of just baby daddies that are just planting seeds, doing the Nick Cannon thing of just seeing how many kids you can have, but not really steward.
What is he up to, like
not
30
really
now?
stewarding. I think he's up to 12, but
he's got like a whole set of disciples.
the fact that we can be a father doesn't mean that we should be a father. And so, again, that's it's back to, we've been kind of dancing around the whole thing about stewardship, which is what masculinity really is about, because we've been made, we're called the head, not because we're dominating, but because that's a place of uh, of responsibility.
Yeah.
That's a word that, is responsibility and accountability. I've probably preached that so often, are just two of the really hard words for people to really uh, want to embrace today,
Yeah.
because it makes them have to be responsible. They can't just say whoops. You've got to have a plan. You've got to have a way of doing things if you're going to bear fruit. I mean, the greatness of Jesus, throughout the Bible, of talking about what simple things, you know talking about seed, talking about rocks, talking about building your house on rock versus sand. All those things break down into all of life, that if we just pay attention to those simple little stories, and realize that while they're simple, they're talking about deep truths, that if we perk our ears up, we can hear what he's saying. I
Yeah.
mean, he's given us the pattern throughout all of out of his word to deal with all of human relationships.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, uh you know as you said earlier, men are given a certain role, women are given a certain role. If we're the head, it doesn't mean that, well, I'm going to dominate my wife, and
Right.
you know, she's got to do what I say, and she's under my feet, and da da da
Yeah.
da.
It's not.
But no, yeah,
No,
go
and I
ahead.
was just gonna say it's not glorious from a biblical standpoint. Like
No,
like
no, it's
it's not authoritative. It's not a control thing because the Bible tells me that I have to love my wife as Christ loved the church, and that
yes,
means being willing to give my life up, even to the point
yes,
of death for my wife and my family. And it's a position of service and sacrifice. And so a lot of
yes,
times, these biblical models, it's all about control. It's all about authority over women. Not at all. It's about me being willing to say, I'm willing to put myself, aside and serve my wife just as Jesus did for me. And if that comes with insult, if that comes with reviled, comes with persecution, or even potentially death, it's my mandate to love Christ as Christ loved the church. And I made this comment when I preached on this a few months ago, when we talked about masculinity. I said, if our job as men is to love Christ as Christ loved the church, then I have to understand that even if there's a conflict and I'm 99.9% right, it's still my responsibility to initiate reconciliation. It doesn't mean that my wife can't do it, but if I think about the way Christ handled reconciliation, he made the decision to go. Even when we were 100% wrong, he was still willing to go and do what was necessary to reconcile our
yeah,
sins. And so I find that when there's a mess in my house or there's conflict, even if I'm justified and I'm correct, if I'm loving Christ, if I'm loving my wife as Christ loved the church, that means I'm going to come hat in hand, and I'm going to say, you know what, I'm sorry, I blew it. Let's fix this, and go from that direction. Terrence, as we wrap up, I
yeah.
just wanted to ask you one question to kind of close things out. Um,
Okay.
let's just say there's you know, if 16 to 20 something young man listening to us kind of have this conversation around masculinity, maybe catches this clip in whatever form it ends up on social media. What would you say for a young man like that that's struggling to find his identity? If you just had to give one piece of encouragement, I can't really make heads or tails. I don't know who I am. What type of advice or word of encouragement would you give to him?
Well, I would hope, if he's not in a church community, that'd be my first suggestion, for him to find a place, and look for a man. I mean, if he's a child that doesn't have if he's a young man that doesn't have a father influence in his life, Look around and see, see who's doing it, see who's fathering their children well, who's consistent at working, uh, and try to connect and try to glean from someone who's done it. Um, what I was struggling to articulate earlier, some of the things that Jesus said, talked about, fathers and sons, mothers instilling in daughters, that kind of society prepares. I mean, we don't have mothers with daughters in the kitchen anymore. So girls go into marriage and you might be lucky to get something made in the microwave for dinner, or you're going out to dinner. Um, and again, because the definitions have changed in our society now, what do you want me barefoot and pregnant, and staying in the kitchen? No. But learning how to be a wife. The Bible says, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing." And I don't want to get away from get on a tangent away from what you originally said. And I feel myself going there, so let me rail myself back. What would we say to that young man again? Uh, uh, we need to find someone who looks solid to you, and the scary thing is, uh, what does solid look like for that young man? Again, I guess being in the church and being in a solid church, and I'm hearing you talk about that you've had sermons about masculinity. I don't know if you know how incredibly rare that is in today's day and age to even broach those subjects. I think we need to once again go back to having more and more older mothers coming alongside young married daughters and young married women, and just kind of shepherd stewarding them through marriage. What would happen if a woman who's struggling in her marriage has an older female that's got an established relationship for years, of being able to go to her and say, "Look, how do I navigate through this?" Same way with young men having older men. The older men are to teach the younger men. The older women are to teach the younger women. There, again, there's that void, where there's that void of stewardship,
Yeah.
and so we get the fruit of what we see in society because we have not properly stewarded. And so that young man, 16 to 20, you know, and I won't, and I would say, because of being a Christian, obviously I'm going to point you to the church, but I found solid role models through athletics.
Mm.
Um, I found them in other places other than the church, and I guess I could say I was blessed. I found really good role models because I didn't have a father, but they really, I would really suggest the church first, and also find a man who's in a long term marriage, that's solid in his employment, solid in his values, upstanding, and latch on to him, and let him. You know, it's tough out there. I understand, and I know you do as well as I. I want to be that. As my kids grow older, I want to make myself available to to be a part of that process for someone else. Hopefully, someone's watching my life and saying, I want to be I want to be more upright like this, like Terrence is. Hopefully, I believe my sons are, watching me, and so that's what we have to do. That's what I hope any young man is who may watch this. Go find someone who's doing it, someone who's solid in their relationship. Not someone that's going from woman to woman, someone that's going from job to job, someone who's got children all over the place. Find a person who's in a solid established family, and latch on to them. That's what I would say.
Amen. Yeah, that's really good. So, Terrence, where can people find you if they want to connect with you on social media?
I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. Um, I'm definitely not hard to find. Um, I'm pretty vocal. I'm pretty out there quite a bit.